Rebel forces from Ethiopia's conflict-hit Tigray region have accused the African Union of bias days after the bloc appointed the former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo as a mediator. A spokesperson for the Tigray People's Liberation Front, Getachew Reda, accused the AU of siding with the Ethiopian government and barely acknowledging the existence of the 10-month-long conflict. On social media, he said that the TPLF is not against the appointment of a mediator, but said it will be naive to expect the mission to work. The Ethiopian government has repeatedly said it would not be willing to hold talks with the TPLF, which it has described as a terrorist organization. To discuss this issue further, we are now joined by Africa security and policy analyst Abdullahi Boru Halakhe in Maryland in the United States. Abdullahi, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to The Globe.
My pleasure.
On what basis are the rebels basing their accusation that the Ethiopian government is siding with the AU?
Yeah, I think when I read the spokesperson of TDF or TPLF, that they weren't very comfortable with the appointment of former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, I was taken aback, not in the sense that they were refusing. I think more as a strategy of not endorsing him wholehearted. And we can go into some of the reasons why at least he suggested as much. AU, they said, barely acknowledged the existence of the conflict, and because the AU's HQ is based in Addis, and they felt that AU was implicitly siding with the current Ethiopian government. One could look at it as largely as a tactic more than them, refusing to do that. The second point to that is, they released a statement when they, took over the Tigray region's headquarters in Mekelle, and they think that some of those conditions have not been met, including, foreign troops leaving. And this comes on the back of the heels of, the United States government sanctioning some senior military officers of Eritrea. So I think much of the way I read it was them trying to, lay the traps, saying, AU is supporting Ethiopian government. I think it's more of a tactic than outrightly denying, the appointment of Olusegun Obasanjo.
Well, it's quite interesting that they raised this argument or this accusation because just a couple of months ago, in June to be specific, the Ethiopia's government called on the African Union to immediately seize this commission of inquiry into the deaths or into the, the impending conflict, citing it as misguided and lacks a legal basis.
That exactly tells you now. A few months ago, it was the Ethiopian government. Today, it is the Tigray government. So what you are seeing is two groups that the distance between them, the trust between them is so huge that everybody has got their own facts and narrative that they are pursuing. For the Ethiopian government, the TPLF and TDF now are a terrorist outfit that they do not have time to sit with, and they shouldn't sit with them because they are proscribed them as such. For the TDF, they say the Ethiopian government is a fascist entity. They have lost any legitimacy as far as the government goes. So they shouldn't be sitting with them. But that, I think, is expected when, the level of tension between these groups is that significant, to put it charitably. But they both know at the back of their mind, they cannot continue fighting forever. But all will try and take, a higher position to try and enhance their negotiating position. But in reality, both know, TPLF is a product of conflict with the previous administration. So they know very well that the only way to resolve this, it's not just on the battleground, which, none of them have so far been able to, to hit a knockout blow. It is going to be on the negotiation table. Like I said, that is going to be very difficult. It's going to be fraught, and you've got to wish the former president of Nigeria the best of luck.
And what exactly is the African Union expected to do, or to what extent should the role and the influence of the African Union, play out in Ethiopia during this crisis?
It is a very difficult one, to be honest with you. AU doesn't seem to necessarily enjoy a great deal of, if you will, legitimacy with so many people. But then again, you've got to understand the trouble with African Union is the trouble with many multilateral institutions, that you are going to be strong as an institution to the extent that the member states want you to be. You can take an example of SADC, EAC, or any of these regional outfit. You can even take it to the global level with respect to the UN. If the member states would want African Union to be strong, they can. So African Union can't exist out of member states. I get a great deal of people are frustrated with the fact that African Union doesn't come in very strongly. But if the member states, particularly now Ethiopia, which is the host country, it's like you asking the UN Security Council or the UN to interfere, to not necessarily to interfere, but to be able to lead a mediation. If there is a political crisis in the United States, it's going to be difficult. However, that is the nature of international affairs. That is going to happen, but there is no way out of this conflict. Other than that, there is no any other entity. Even if the UN were to lead this, they will only support the African Union, and the African Union become the lead agency, and they will just be supporting that. And so I think it's the reality that both sides knows. It's the reality that both sides, as of now, at least rhetorically, wouldn't want to admit that is the best way to resolve the current crisis.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said that his government could assemble as much as 100,000 forces in no time, and he even added that he could recruit as much as 1 million young men to join the army. I know that so much has been said about this, recruitment of children into the army, and for him to be boastfully saying such, it leaves a lot to be desired.
It is, but there is another way of looking at it. That Abiy Ahmed's military is decimated. So he is trying to get as many bodies in the front line to be able to stop the TDF incursion. That he is worried because TPLF, which transformed itself into TDF, is working with one wing of the Oromo people called the OLA, Oromo Liberation Army. Oromos are almost a third of the country, right, in terms of the population. So he's worried. But you've also got to understand this as largely a desperate attempt to try and keep things going. I think today he's in Uganda having talks with President of Uganda. If you know the President of Uganda, he and his country plays an oversized role in the regional politics as well as military. The troops have been deployed to Somalia. The troops are they were inside the DRC, Central African Republic. They were sent to South Sudan. The previous week, that is Abiy, he was in Turkey. And some of the discussions, or at least some of the readouts that we've obtained from the meetings, was that he was getting some military replenishment for his military. Because France, with whom they've had an agreement to supply them with some military hardware, stopped that for a moment. So all these things, part of it is bravado, but the reality is it is clearly inescapable that Ethiopia's military is in a very poor shape. But you've got to ask again, can people, even if they are in their thousands or even millions, as he said, who are untrained, being sent to the battlefront against a group that is fairly strong militarily, does that lead to any military outcome for this that is favorable to Addis? I think your guess is as good as mine.
What's your understanding of the willingness or the lack thereof, perhaps, of the warring parties, the rebels, and Abiy Ahmed's government to engage in a meaningful dialogue to find a truce or a ceasefire to this conflict?
I think me and you, we know that Abiy, at least as of now, considers himself as the de facto leader. And the TDF, they have framed their conflict with Abiy in a very righteous term. So when you have two righteous forces that both see their fight as almost cast in very, quote unquote, holy terms, it's going to be very difficult for both of them to back down without necessarily losing face. But deep down, they all know. Is it 8 or 13 points that TDF published as, their bare minimum before any political settlement is agreed upon, they were very clear in the sense that, despite, the public utterances, they were willing and ready to entertain a thought that political solution to the current problem is the only way. But as we all know, it's one thing to say that you do not want, a political solution to this military crisis, and quite another to be able to sustain the war going. Secondly, what you say in public and what you do in private is completely different. But I think a great deal of it for Abiy, young prime minister, he thought that there is a military solution to this problem. He's now stuck in. For TDF, they know that despite scoring major political gain, it's very difficult for multilateral institutions to recognize you that very quickly. They know, at least they have the muscle memory of, years, of almost over 30 years that they fought against the previous government. Do they want an entire generation that would be fighting for the next, God knows how many years, for them to be able to say we are victorious? Also, let's be realistic. If, for instance, they invoke the article, I think 29 of the Ethiopia's constitution, and they secede, they will be sandwiched between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Mm-hmm. Both countries have been very clear about the way they look at them. Do they want to have a country like that? So right. I think there are many ways to slice this, and I think we are just at the beginning of it.
Do you agree with the popular sentiment that the AU's proximity to the corridors of power in Addis Ababa is perhaps the main restraint to, its ability to influence its host?
Yes, indeed. That is just but one element to it. How many conflicts have we seen AU lead without necessarily not being seen as biased? But in the Ethiopian case, at least, it plays a disproportionate role because, AU is hosted by Ethiopia. So I think that is very clear. That is very outright. All the organs of AU have not come out very, in a very robust way without necessarily, castigating any parties to the conflict. They can talk the language around, humanitarian access. They can talk around the language of, civilian protection. Those are languages that, can buy you a cover. But when you are not saying any of those, I think it is very easy, and of course sometimes convenient, for one of the opposing group to come out and say, hey, you are not being, you are clearly biased in your approach. But also, I think these are the challenges of the AU. Even if it comes out very strongly and say and condemn both parties to the conflict, what else can you do? AU without the member states. If member states, like for instance Ethiopia, their troops are inside Somalia as part of AMISOM. So this is a country that has provided a great deal of military muscle to the AU. It's hosting the AU. So I think there is the primary one, which is a structural problem within the AU, where member states do not want it to be as strong as it should be. And then the second one, because AU is being hosted by Ethiopia, and as such, it doesn't want to antagonize Ethiopia. So it's both.
Yeah, I suppose being the host of the AU, the Ethiopian government sees it fit to tread very carefully in handling this conflict. And the focus perhaps will be on the international community. So to what extent are the diplomatic efforts of the United States and as well as the EU in terms of quelling the situation in Ethiopia?
It's been hard, to be honest with you. I think the USA boss, Samantha Power, was in Ethiopia last week. And one of the things that she wanted was a sit down with Prime Minister Abiy. And this is just a very polite diplomatic way of putting it from them. But, they say the Prime Minister was not in Addis to be able to see her, right? And, the State Department has been issuing, every other week or so, statements to the effect that, protection of civilian, humanitarian access, EU the same, I think it just shows the complexity of the current crisis, as with many other crises, that it's very difficult unless the host country is willing to be able to move the needle. The best you can do is sanctions. And again, it's not like 20, 30 years ago where the Western countries ruled the roost. If, for instance, like I said earlier, France refused to sell, the military hardware to Ethiopia. Ethiopia just moved to the next country, and that was, in this case, Turkey. China is in the region. So I think it just shows that it is very fraught to be able to move purely in one direction in the international affairs. You saw the UN women boss coming out and saying, walking back some of the statements regarding, women being used, a rape against women being used as a tool of war, which the UN Convention is very, very clear, and UN Security Council is very clear about, but they had to walk back because UN cannot work, inside Ethiopia without Ethiopia allowing it to do.
Right. Now, Abdullahi, let's now move on to Kenya, where we see, a great deal of antagonism between President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy, William Ruto. Is it too ambitious to now suggest that William Ruto's star is shining brightly?
I think that is part of it is accurate in the sense that he is the only 2022 presidential candidate who has come out and say, I will be contesting. Me and you can guess one or two other candidates who will be contesting, correct? So he has had a head start. But I think what is happening, at least in the background, the president, it's very clear since March 2018, relations between him, that is the president, and William Ruto, who is his deputy for the last two elections, their relationship is irretrievably broken. But the president has shown his hand very early that he doesn't see him as somebody who is going to succeed him. So therefore, when the coalition against William Ruto are cobbled together, we will be able to see if the head start William Ruto has had will be eaten into. However, I just have to say this for your viewers. William Ruto is going to be the man to beat in 2022 election, not just because he has the head start, not because, he was in the government for the last, 10 years by the time Kenya's election is around, but because he's an incredibly skilled political player. And so therefore, again, it's a very Kenyan politics, presidential politics. Since 2002, no one party has won on its own. So most of the parties have to form a coalition. And unfortunately, the way Kenyan politics is organized for now, those coalitions have to be ethnic coalitions. So I think it's early, but I think by the end of this year, we will know where we'll stand. And by August, we will know the winner.
So will his brush, or rather will William Ruto's brush with the international community, well, the International Criminal Court, I beg your pardon, not hamper his chances of the presidency?
I think the ship on that, I could say, has sailed. If ICC, that is the International Criminal Court, would have prevented anybody from, aspiring and running and even getting elected, that was the year 2013. When both the president and his deputy, plus four others were accused, among many other crimes, crimes against humanity. That didn't work. What they did was that, at least in 2013, was to make themselves victims, not the victims of 2007 electoral violence that both Kenyatta and Ruto were accused of. They said ICC is an imperial project that is targeting us. Please, let's create as a result, that created a siege mentality where the voters said, we will be voting, in fact, against the ICC, not necessarily for William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta. There are talks. I've seen one of the lawyers been taken to the ICC, and he said that, some of the witnesses were bribed to walk away from the cases. Even if those cases were revived, it will only increase his stock because it will be seen as an attempt by the president to try and hamper William Ruto's accession to the presidency. So if anything, it will increase his profile further than where it is already. I think, if I'm not mistaken, ICC will not be a huge factor in the 2021 Kenya's election.
You know, that relationship between Kenyatta and William Ruto was this so-called, near perfect bromance between these two African leaders. What could have possibly gone wrong?
I think we probably need to step back and go back to where it started, right? The alliance between William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta was, as you mentioned, a pure bromance between two political leaders. And the two communities that both represent were communities that generally engage in conflict, electoral conflict, during Kenya's elections, right? William Ruto comes from the Rift Valley province. President Uhuru Kenyatta comes from central Kenya. And, the alliance, therefore, in 2013, was an alliance of convenience. The convenience being, to beat the ICC. Because they knew, because the community that the president comes from is the largest ethnic community in Kenya. The community that William Ruto comes from is the second largest. So generally, it's a very reductionist, but Kenya's election is nothing more than an ethnic census. So when the two groups came together, they won. So it's a purely convenience. ICC cases are no longer there. So I think the president and particularly people around him feel that they might not get the kind of protection that they might need, because they're also some of the most wealthy communities, some of his partners, particularly the president. And the president family is one of the biggest, economic family in the country, aside from, being the political family. So I think there is that. I think I need to mention, it would be unfair not to mention this, their relationship fairly ended March 2018, when the president shook hands with his style, political nemesis, Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga fought against William Ruto combo in 2013 and as well as in 2017. And in 2007, when there was violence, William Ruto was actually one of the staunchest lieutenants of Mr. Odinga. So it felt like, again, it's just the typical moving chairs of Kenyan politics just ahead of the presidential election. So I think it's going to be very difficult. The differences between the president and his deputy is growing by day. Just last week, whether it was a routine, that was how it was couched, his security was withdrawn. His role has been diminished, and some of the roles and functions that he has been distributed to the other ministers. And so therefore, for the last 3 years, there has been concerted effort, to essentially tell him, look, you are not needed here, and the best way is for you is to resign. I mean, a few weeks ago, he was prevented by a junior public servant not to travel to Uganda, where he was meant to go and meet the president of Uganda. So I think everything is being said, he is being humiliated, just to be pushed out. However, the 2010 constitution is a fairly robust constitution. The president can't just wake up willy-nilly and just kick his deputy, because it is the office and they were elected together. So I think, were it not for the robustness of the 2010 constitution, William Ruto could have been pushed out of the government.